right, hello, I'm Alex, and today I'm going to talk about AI guardrails, specifically for Cursor and for Claude Code. And I'm not going to make this too detailed, but I wanted to cover a few quick things because I've seen plenty of posts of people where they talk about, you know, the loss of a database or the loss of their code, or how they, you know, had a bad prompt and the AI wiped out all of their work that was actually good to begin with. There's also the circular reference where the AI gets stuck trying to fix something, and every prompt breaks something that it previously fixed, and it kind of never recovers from that. So sometimes having some of these guardrails in place could save the day. And so today I am going to talk exactly about that. So to get us started, I am going to go to my desktop, and we're going to create a folder. And we're not going to create a folder. I already created the folder. Just have to find it. And no, I take it back. I need to create a folder. So we're going to open up Terminal, and I'm in Windows, obviously. And what I'm going to do is create a folder here called AI Guardrails. All right, we're going to CD into the AI Guardrails folder and do it there. So empty folder. So from here, one of the first things that I typically do, and one of the first things that we're going to talk about, is start up a Git repository. So Git is already installed on my machine. I'm not going to go through the installation process. I think everybody knows how to install stuff at this point. It's not the focus here. So I'm just going to do a git init, and this initializes a blank repository. So what we could do is we could create a file, something that we can check in as the initial prompt. So from here, I'm going to open Cursor first because I think that'll be easier. So we're going to do cursor dot, and we're going to get out of the terminal a little bit, but not fully. And so I'm personally a big fan of Cursor for a bunch of different reasons, but one of them is the fact that it's based on Visual Studio Code. So it's a familiar IDE for most developers. Additionally, it has a terminal built in, and so this allows us to actually work with something like Claude Code directly out of the box. So So I can open a Ubuntu prompt, because Claude Code does work best as a CLI that isn't in Windows but is in Linux. So it works great on the Mac, it works great on Linux. In Windows, the ideal scenario is either to use a Claude Code plugin in Visual Studio Code, or use the Claude desktop app for some things, or do it through WSL, which is a Linux subsystem for Windows. And this allows you to run Ubuntu behind the scenes within Windows. And so this prompt right here is actually over in my Ubuntu installation. And here I can type in Claude, and we're going to launch Claude. Claude needs permissions for this folder, so I'm going to grant that, and we're up and running. So right here in Cursor, I have two things going for me. So off the top of, right from the top here, I've got Claude sitting in the terminal window, and I've also got Cursor sitting, you know, right here, Cursor agent, and both can work with the same code base, which is huge, right? That's a nice thing. So we're going to create some things to make sure we can get this Git repository up and running. And of course, because this is Visual Studio Code, we also do have the ability to manage Git using Visual UI. So I'll show that here today as well. So again, for anybody who's not using Git, it's really you're really kind of doing yourself a disservice. Like, this is something that you should do. And by the way, the repository that we create, I am going to check into GitHub, and I'm going to share that with everybody as part of the stream, so that it'll be in the description below this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask Claude over here to create a README file, a blank README file. All right, I'm going to answer yes, and a blank README file is created. So now I'm going to switch over to my regular prompt, and we can do a directory here, ls, or you could do dir if you're old school and DOS. You can see we have this one file that is readme.md. It's empty. And usually when we work with Git likes some kind of a README file, because that's what shows up on that front page when you look at the Git repository. And this usually contains the information about the project itself. In this particular case, this is going to be about AI governance and guardrails, but I don't have any content for it yet. I am going to basically create that towards the end of my presentation, after we've gone through and created some of these rules and guardrails and put them in place. We'll let either Claude or Cursor fill out that readme.md file. So to demonstrate, I did go to GitHub, and GitHub, I created a AI Guardrails public Git repo, and then it's given me code that I can use in order to check in what I have into this repo. So that's exactly the steps that I'm going to take here. So we're going to add the remote origin. All right, that's done. And I could have done all these commands at the same time, but I'm doing them one by one. Then we have currently we have a branch called master. We're going to create a branch called main instead. Master will never be checked in. It's not necessary. And then what we can do is we can push what we currently have here in this folder, which is really this just blank README file, over into the environment. Now it failed because there's no, it's a 0 bytes file, so there's nothing really to send, so it doesn't want to do it. But the other thing that we want to do is create a dev branch from this. And to do that, we can type in git checkout /b dev. So it's going to create a branch called dev, and it's going to create it from main and put us into that branch all at the same time using this /b parameter. And so there we are. We're still looking at our empty README file, and we're sort of ready to go. So I'm going to create another folder here called docs. And I could have done that visually too, because I am in Visual Studio Code. You can right click here, select new folder, and it would create it for you. And what we're going to do is do a git status. All right, so you can see we have no commits yet. We have a README file, and nothing's committed. So we're going to do git add asterisk. So this adds everything that we've done so far to the current commit. And we're going to do a git commit /m, and we're going to say that this is our initial commit. All right. And now we can do a git push. Now this will come back with an error because we don't have a dev branch up on GitHub. And so there it is. And I can just take this command, copy it, paste it here. I'm not sure why it changed that to doesn't want to copy and paste. There we go. And that now pushed the code over to GitHub. And if we go to GitHub here and look at it, we should now have some code. And there's a README file which is completely empty and nothing else. All right. And so this allows us to start off from a kind of a blank slate. So if I do a git status at the prompt, I can see everything is up to date. I can do this visually as well. I can come in here and there's nothing to commit. Everything is clean. And this is also our initial commit. We have our message here, the -m that we added when we ran this command right here. That's for message. And this is the message that we gave it. These should be relatively short, but they should be descriptive, because if you do have to go back to one of these branches that are in your history, you'll want to be able to somehow identify it. And you will either have to look through code to identify it or identify it by your description. You can also add multiple messages. So you could say -m initial commit, and that would be the title, and then another -m with a longer description. And so it'll use that as the first one as the title, the second one as the description. And that is honestly the extent of the git commands that I use. Because I'm a single developer, I typically will work in the develop branch directly. So I don't branch off of develop and then check that in. I just do my work in develop. Once everything is working the way I want it to locally in develop, I'll push that to my remote dev branch, and then I will create a pull request into my main branch, which is what I'm considering production, or the work that is going live is my main branch. All right, so we got that out of the way, and the initial Git repo is configured. The next step that I would like to do is create a document over here in my documents folder for Git basics. And we're going to do that using Cursor. So I have a prompt already picked out, assuming my copy and paste works. I am in planning mode, which is always the way to go. I'm using Composer, which is the model that Cursor provides by default. We can go all the way to Claude Opus here as well, but I'm using this default model. I'm going to paste my prompt, which basically says, in the docs folder, create a Git basics MD file. And we can take that a step further, and I can delete this part. And because Cursor is aware of what we're working with here, I can just drag that folder right there into my prompt. So in docs, create something called Git basics MD, then explain these commands, which are the ones that I just demonstrated. These are the commands that I tend to use with Git. And for each command, explain how it works, what it does, and provide some emphasis around these things: small commits, feature branches, and avoid direct changes to main. So you always want to push to main. You don't want to make changes directly to main. And of course, if what you're building falls apart because of a bad prompt or whatever other reason, you have the ability to roll back. I'm going to minimize that. Okay, and what we have here is the plan to build our Git basics.md file. So looking at it, this does look pretty good. I don't see any issues with it. There are 4 to-dos. I'm going to agree with all of them, and I'm just going to hit the build button. All right, that is done, and we can review what it did. So you can see the folder turned green and the file is green. That means we have unsaved changes or changes that aren't committed. And typically you will see those changes in green when you review them. If there's something that we can review where it's a difference between what it was and what it is, then that'll be reflected here. But because it's a new file, we don't really have anything to show as a previous version. It's all ready to go. And visually, we can also come in here to the Git tab, and we can say this is our Git basics documentation, and we can commit that. All right, and now we have 2 commits. I could have also done that, of course, directly here from the terminal. And here in the terminal, the command that I frequently use is going to be git status. That one I basically do all the time to see what's not committed. Then I can do git add asterisk, which will add everything that I want included in the commit. And then I do the git commit with a message. And then I do a git push if I want to send it to the remote repository. So we could still do that here. And this will now send that up to the repository over in GitHub. And from GitHub, we can create a pull request that also merges that into our live environment. Okay. So the idea behind using Git is that as you work with your AI agent, you are giving it a prompt. That prompt gets executed and code gets created. You then test that work before committing it. And if everything works the way you expect, then you commit it. If 80 or 90% of it works, but you see some bugs, then you want to commit that, but then work on those bugs separately, meaning you don't necessarily want to keep prompting the AI to fix things on top of what mostly works. And the reason being is that, again, if it gets confused, if it gets lost along the way, it could destroy what it has already built. And so you want to always incrementally improve what you're building as opposed to letting it rewrite it if it feels like it. And you know, I say that because there are no AI agents with smarts, right? This is all a statistical thing. So it's picking up what the next word is or what the next thing it should do from a statistical analysis of all of this data that it's collected. And so you never really know, like it's trained pretty well and it does things for the most part correctly, but there's always room for error and there's always room for hallucinations. And it's always possible that it's going to either add a feature that you didn't want or work on something not exactly the way that you intended it to be. And so that takes us to the next step. What we want to do, since we're working with Cursor here, is we're going to start a new chat. I'm going to close that one. Is work on Cursor rules. So basically, we can guide the AI to make sure that it doesn't do anything destructive in terms of Git commands, because there are commands where we can delete branches, where we can delete code, we can revise stuff, we can push things to main before they're ready. We can basically deploy to production before something is tested. So we want to make sure that Cursor isn't able to do that, or at least asks for permission or explains itself before doing any of those steps. We also want to make sure that it works with databases in the right way. Now, everybody is different, and my workflow might be a little bit old school, but what I like in my projects is to tell the agent to create me repeatable deployment scripts. So if I'm working with SQL Server or Postgres or MySQL, I'm going to give it instructions on building me an SQL file that I can then run myself manually. And this gives me a couple of advantages. One, I can look at the file, I can see if anything is broken. I can take it into the editor for the database and use it in a transaction type of environment where I can sort of test how well that script that it generated works. And to be quite honest, there have been cases where it gets some field names wrong and just some basics that it kind of hallucinates. But for the most part, it does a pretty good job with queries. It also does a really good job with repeatable queries, meaning if I run a script and that script deletes some tables and adds some new data and all this other stuff, I may not necessarily be able to rerun it. You could get pretty close. Obviously, if you're deleting things, unless you do them in a transaction where you can recover that, you're going to lose something. But a lot of the times when you're inserting store procedures, creating tables, adding fields, it'll do that pretty easily, and then it'll add checks in place that say, oh, if this field doesn't exist, then go ahead and create it. But if that field already exists, then do nothing. So I didn't mean to go on that tangent, but yeah, so database safety. In other words, I'm in charge of the database, not the AI agent. It's going to give me scripts. It's going to give me instructions, especially if I'm new to databases and I don't know exactly what I'm doing. You can get instructions on how to implement those scripts, but you don't necessarily want it to do so. Additionally, a lot of the times your code and database scripts go hand in hand. And so what you want is some ability for your CI/CD pipeline to deploy your database scripts along with the deployment of your code. And so one of the things that I've been using lately is a open source package called DBUp, which works with Postgres, MySQL, and SQL Server. Might work with other databases. Those are the three that I've tried it with. And what you could do with it is you could basically create a collection of scripts, track changes in the database, and automatically apply all of those scripts in order every time you create a new database. So for example, if you do run into the issue where AI destroys your schema, which is the structure of your database, you could get all of that back. In theory, if you wanted to seed your database with data, you could create that as a script as well. But the best way to keep your database from being lost is to give read access to the database for your AI agent, but not write access. One of the ways that I also do that is by scripting out my database. So I script it all out into SQL files, which are just text files, and dump them in a folder and let AI look at that, but I don't necessarily give it access to the actual database itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask Cursor to plan out this rule. And this rule is going to create some core safety mechanisms for us. It's going to talk about the Git workflow. So for example, again, no destructive commands. We're going to talk about database safety. And we're going to talk about security as well. So the rules here are going to be, never delete files without any kind of confirmation. So we don't want code deleted or anything else deleted for that matter. We don't want destructive Git commands, as I said before. We don't want to force pushes into our remote Git repo. We don't want to deploy anything automatically. So as you can see, these are all kind of common sense rules to keep some, guardrails on AI. And you could say, well, I'm not really all that worried about these things because I'll never give it a prompt to deploy something anyway. But here's the thing. If you're working with skills that you've downloaded from the internet, if you're copying and pasting commands and skills and things like that from different repos, or if you're letting the AI download specific packages that it can use within your software, then there are chances of catching something bad. For example, I can create a skill that basically scans my hard drive for password files, for .env files, which typically contain secrets, and then pushes those files to some remote URL using some kind of a behind-the-scenes Python or C# application that will work in place of what my skill is supposed to do. And my skill may actually do whatever thing it says it does, but it can also do these things behind the scenes. And so to protect your code base, your machine, these are the kinds of guardrails that you want to put in place. And we're actually going to switch over to Claude in a minute and also add something called a git ignore file, which is a file that prevents Git from obtaining any kind of secret information that we don't want to check into the environment. All right, and our plan is built, so we can see what we have going on here. All right, so this is pretty concise, right? We don't want to delete. Let's see what we got here. Do not implement features without a linked story or task. This is also pretty important, and I'll mention it. A lot of the times you say, well, I want to build this app, and you might go through 2 or 3 questions with the AI, and then it'll just start building the entire app from 1 or 2 prompts. The idea would be to break that down into much, much smaller pieces. You want to break that down into what I like to use is user stories, and that's going to be part of a different stream, I think. But the idea is to define small chunks of work that the AI can work on without too much confusion, because you make it work too hard, you're going to get poor results. You're going to get features you didn't ask for. All of this stuff needs to be cleaned up. There's going to be bugs. By working on smaller sections one at a time, you're a bit more focused. The AI tends to respond better. Things are built quicker. You stay a little bit more engaged because you're constantly interacting with the agent, and you're able to move things forward. So I think it's the way to go. So we have some good rules here. We have good rules around Git workflow, no destructive commands. That's important. Never push. That's another important one. All right, so never execute SQL directly. So we want to build scripts and use migrations wherever possible. We also, the good security ones, do not read, log, or commit exposed secrets. Warn if user asks to commit secrets bearing files. So if we're If we have a end file and we're trying to commit it to Git, it shouldn't be allowed. All right. We also lock down the GitHub workflows. So this looks pretty good to me. I'm going to hit build, and it's going to build that documentation. All right, and it's done. So that was pretty quick. I'm going to switch to Claude here. And for Claude, we want to do something similar. But what we want is basically to have Claude use the same rules that Cursor just built. Right, so we have this build, we have this security rules. We want those same security rules applied to Claude. But Claude uses a CLAUDE.md file that sits in the root folder as opposed to these. So what we need to do here is explain to Claude how to craft its CLAUDE.md file so that it uses those other files. Now, before I do that, am I forgetting anything? Yes, I am. I need to check in my repository here. So I'm going to take these files and say cursor rules. I'm going to commit that. All right, so that's done. We can also sync these changes, which will push them up to the remote Git repository. So I'm going to do that. All right, and that is done. I'm not doing this bug bot. And I don't want it to run fetch. All right, so back to Claude. Mr. Claude over here is sitting here quietly and it is not aware of any of these additional rules. So what we can do is we can say review.cursor folder. This contains core Git DB and security rules that Cursor follows. You should follow the same rules. So write your CLAUDE.md file to reference those documents so I can maintain them in one place. So this allows me to maintain just these 4 documents because this is an iterative process. So these documents are going to change over time. We're going to add more and more to them, clean them up, refine them. And I don't want to have to do that in 2 different places, especially if I'm using 2 different agents to do this work. So we're going to give it this prompt and see what it comes back with. So it's going through the files and reading them. And there we go. It's asking me to create the CLAUDE.md file. Now, this is a little too interactive for me. So for example, if I'm working on some sort of a cross-layer function that, touches, I don't know, 15, 20 different files, I'm not going to sit here and approve each one individually. So I want it to work on its own, but right now I'm going to just answer yes. So it's only creating that CLAUDE.md file and it's done. So let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, so there's our CLAUDE.md file. And so right off the top, it says that oops, that's a little thick. Let's see what we got here. Right, we have project rules are maintained in Cursor rules. We have Cursor safety. We have the Git workflow. We have database safety, and we have security. So this file itself is actually relatively light, and most of the actual work is sitting in these other files up here. So at this point, we need to commit this. So I'm going to do that and see if it does it. And I don't know. Yeah, so here's the yes no commit. And so this is always a little shady on Claude's part. Like, I honestly think that the workflow of doing it yourself, like here, so I have no idea what it actually did in that prompt. So we're going to add it. Create it, and we're going to push it. And now it's up in the remote space. All right, the next thing, we're going to go back to Claude again for a few more quick things. So yeah, so here it was not able to push it anyway, which is good. We don't want it to. The next thing that I want to do is get Claude to start working on some refinement to the way it operates. So there are tools and settings that we don't necessarily want it to work with. And actually, before we do the Claude thing, I'm going to switch back to a new agent here in Cursor. And I think I'll leave this in agent mode. I'm just going to say create a git ignore file that makes sure that secrets are not being checked in. So we'll do a very quick file. It's going to think for a moment and then just create it. All right, and you can see that things like environment variables, which are these files right here, .env, are excluded. We don't bring in anything like credentials or secrets. We avoid checking in certificates. And we do, looks like, have like local settings, those override. We also don't want to bring in, which is true, AWS or Azure settings as well. These could contain tokens and secrets as well. So it's a good file. You can, of course, open it and look at it. And of course, that needs a check-in. Git ignore created. And we're done. All right, so all of that is good. Let's work on Cursor being a little bit more constrained. And we could do that because Claude here in particular allows us to configure a settings file and a permissions file. So we can give it access to certain things, but not others. So one of the things that you may want to limit is its ability to access the internet. So the idea would be to allow it to work with certain URLs, but not every URL. And so here we have safe read operations, ask before doing the edits. We don't want to allow it to work with databases. We don't want it to do destructive Git commands. And then we have some documentation that it needs to write for us as well. All right, I'm going to approve that. And it's working on the file. Okay, and so here is the file that shows which commands it's able to work with and which commands it's not. So here, for example, these are the deny list, and all of these commands are not allowed. All right, and these are the ones that are allowed. All right, let's let it create that file. That looks good. What this allows you to do is be really granular in the way that you assign permissions. In security, we have something called the principle of least privilege. And the idea behind the principle of least privilege is that you deny the user all permissions except those that they need to do their job and nothing more. And by denying them everything, every time you run into some wall because the permission isn't there, you could grant it that little piece to let it move forward. So at the end of the day, you're only allowing it to do the things that you want it to really do, and you're protecting your system in the process. Because if, as an example, it doesn't have the ability to talk to a remote URL on the internet somewhere where, you know, some skill asked it to send some of your files over to that remote URL, it won't be able to do that without at least asking you for permission to do that. And that's important because I think not only are we in an interesting scenario now with you know, these AI agents developing applications that have vulnerabilities in them that expose keys and certificates and other secrets, you know, directly in GitHub as well as in their code. But in addition to that, it's also a new avenue of attack for hackers. Hackers know that AI will download and use a NPM package or a NuGet package if it's told to do so. And so by creating a malicious package that you can incorporate into your software that you're building, just because you're using some specific skill or something like that, it looks innocent enough, right? Your skill tells Claude or Cursor to download this specific package and incorporate it into your build. As developers, we would probably question it, but those who are building applications and are not necessarily developers, which is a segment of people now working with these AI agents, that's a problem, because you could get into a scenario where your application, which is popular, is actually a you know, some sort of a Trojan or malware, or, you know, collects credit card information and sends it to somebody else. And at the end of the day, you could be liable for stuff like that. So security is something that you should take seriously. And you should put these guardrails in place to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen to you, or at least you've done as much due diligence as possible to prevent this stuff from happening. Can you prevent it 100%? Probably not. But just with the things that I've shown in this stream today, you're probably already 30 to 40% better off than if you didn't have these tools. And of course, you can question Claude or Cursor and ask, why are you using these? Like, what's the purpose? And it should be able to explain the reasoning. So here is our permission file. And this looks pretty good. And there's our settings file that has our allow and our deny permissions. I'm going to ask it, before I commit all this, I'm going to ask it to make a quick tweak to this and add web URL whitelist. Give it a prompt like that. Let's see what it comes back with. It's a little slow today. It's thinking. All right, we're going to do dev defaults. That's fine. I'm going to go with that recommendation. And I'm going to let it make the edits. And so there we go. We now have a whitelist of what it can fetch. And obviously, we can add additional things to this as we go. But remember, again, the principle of least privilege. You're locked down by default, and only when you ask do you gain access to additional permissions. All right, we're almost there. All right, and we're done. And I will say that this is honestly the bulk of what I wanted to demonstrate today. I will bring back a chat window from Cursor, and I'm going to check all of this in. And I just want to try one of these rules and see if they hold true. So I'm going to right click here, create a new folder. I'm going to call that folder app, and I'm going to give Cursor a quick task. In the app folder, create a single HTML page using vanilla HTML, CSS, JavaScript that displays the top 5 most important AI guard rails as cards on that page. You can use Bootstrap, but no other frameworks. So we're just building a quick HTML page. And remember that this requires one or more stories. And let's see what he builds for us. All right, well, since we don't have that, let's do, instead of 5, do the 4. Yep, we're going to put the stories at the repo root level. All right, we got 3 to-dos. And I do like looking at these plans. I like looking at these plans and understanding exactly what the AI is looking at and why, and how it's thinking about the problem. Depending on the complexity, and I think on further streams, I am going to start building something and really kind of digging through my process for building applications using AI. It's those little steps, it's checking in frequently, and it's refining the plans before you let it execute anything. So this does look pretty good. So I'm going to hit build. Okay, we got a stories folder. All right, so this technically didn't work exactly the way I intended it, because it should have created the story and then it should have had me approve that story before it built the web page. But instead, it created the story and the web page at the same time. I'm going to click this live server so we can see what that web page looks like. And it does not look very good at all. So I just told it that the page looks awful. Let's see if it's able to fix that. And it didn't. It did indeed fix it. What I'm going to do is open up the browser here inside of Cursor, and I'm going to maximize that as much as I can. And there's our page with the four items. I will ask it now. So I'm asking it, why did you build something without an approved story. Okay, so it it it's interesting how explicit you really have to be when you work with AI, because it just assumed that because I switched it from plan mode to execute mode, that the story is approved, even though it didn't really exist. So what we need to do is tell it to make sure that the story exists first and is part of the plan before it builds anything real. So all right, and I'll put it into agent mode to do that. Okay, so it looks like it caught that. So let me start another chat and say, add a page with a table of permissions for web URLs from the rules. Okay. Yep, we're going to take those. Okay, and there it is. And it's incorrectly saying that it's going to create the page. Okay, so we can do that, and we can now, let's see where the plan is. Okay, that looks good. I'm gonna let it build the story. Okay, there's my story. And now that the story exists, I can do another prompt that says, implement this story. And technically I should have put that into plan mode, give it the ability to ask me questions, but I'm running short on time. Okay, and the page is built. There's our cards, and here's our permissions. So that all works, and we have guardrails in place. And I hope you've enjoyed today's stream, and I will be back next week.